This video tutorial is all about the kidney and specifically kidney disease. The question on the board there or on the slide in front of you is, how can urine be used to diagnose disease? Now, urine is really important in the diagnosis of certain diseases. If there are substances in the urine that should have been filtered out by the kidney, then it can be indicative of kidney failure. So, for example, if there is glucose in the urine, that might be indicative that the patient has diabetes. Or if there is sort of certain hormones in the urine, that might be indicative that the patient is pregnant. Or perhaps if there are proteins in the urine, that might be indicative of very high blood pressure. Now, diabetes, high blood pressure can cause damage to the kidneys, as can things like kidney stones and blunt traumas. You can survive with just one working kidney, as the blood can still be filtered by the remaining kidney. However, if both of your kidneys fail, there are only two possible treatments to stop the toxins and salts from building up to really fatal levels in the body. And we're going to look at those two treatments today. Now, the reason why the buildup of toxins and salts is so fatal is because the toxins can interfere with metabolism, so that's the chemical reactions in your body, and the wrong salts and water balance will affect every single cell of your body. Now, other sort of ways that the kidneys can be damaged, they can be damaged and destroyed by infections. Some people have a genetic problem that might result in kidney damage or kidney failure. But whatever the cause is, damage to both of your kidneys can be fatal. It can lead to death. So in terms of treatments then, treatment option number one is dialysis. Now, with dialysis, patients are connected to a dialysis machine, and that dialysis machine essentially acts like an artificial kidney. So the patient's blood runs out of their body through tubes into the machine, and in the machine, excess fluid and excess toxins are drawn off. And then there are tubes that will take the blood back into the patient's body. With dialysis, each dialysis session, so in order to sort of clean the whole of your blood, that takes about 8 hours, and it needs to be repeated twice a week. So it has an enormous impact on a patient's life. In addition to these 2 8-hour sessions, the patient has to manage their diet really, really carefully between sessions to ensure that they keep their blood chemistry as stable as possible. Now, this diagram here just shows in slightly more detail what's going on inside that dialysis machine. I'm just going to give you a moment to have a look at that. And one more diagram, again showing this process. So as you can see within these machines, there is a really important fluid, which is labeled here, called dialysis fluid. Now that dialysis fluid contains the correct concentration of salts that are required in blood plasma. Therefore, any excess salts in the blood that flow from the patient into this machine will move from a high concentration in the blood to a lower concentration in the dialysis fluid. So that's just by simple diffusion. Dialysis fluid will also contain the correct amount of glucose. This means that the glucose does not diffuse out of the blood, as the concentration of glucose in the dialysis machine will match the glucose in the blood. Finally, the dialysis fluid contains no urea. This means that the urea in the blood will move from a high concentration in the blood to a low concentration in the dialysis fluid, again, just by simple diffusion. Just going to show you one more diagram just to really help you understand what's going on within this dialysis machine. So just give you a moment again to see that slide there. The second treatment option for kidney failure is transplant. Now, transplants, although fantastic, they come with a lot of sort of issues relating to rejection. There is the sort of rejection problem. There are antigens on the surface of our cell, and the antigens of the donor organ will be different to those of the recipient. We all have slightly unique antigens. There is a risk, therefore, that the antibodies of the immune system of the recipient will attack the antigens on the surface of the donor organ. And this is going to result in rejection and destruction of the donated kidney. There are a number of ways to reduce the risk of rejection. One way of doing that is to make sure that when you're doing a donation, there's a match between the antigens of the donor and the recipient, and that match is to be made as close as possible. So, for example, we can use a donor kidney with a tissue type very similar to the recipient. So from people with the same blood group, so the antigens are as matched as possible. In order to reduce the risk of rejection, the recipient is also given drugs to suppress their immune system, and they're going to have to take those drugs for the rest of their lives. They're known as immunosuppressant drugs. When you do receive a transplant, the transplanted organ unfortunately won't last forever. So the average transplanted kidney will work for around 9 years, although some do last longer than that. And then once the organ starts to fail, so at the end of those 9 years, the patient will have to return to dialysis. So that's back to going into the hospital twice a week for that 8-hour dialysis session. And they then have to wait for another suitable kidney to be found. In terms of the actual donation and the operation that happens, the donated kidney is put in, as shown on this diagram here, it's put in into the groin and is attached to a vein and an artery in the groin. The donor kidney, not only does it need to be matched to the recipient, it also needs to be removed from the donor less than an hour after the donor has died, which just sort of adds to the complexity of this whole procedure and why it is so hard to actually ensure there is a sort of successful transplant that happens. Now, most sources of kidneys come from people who die suddenly. So, for example, it might be their death was caused by a road accident or from a stroke or a heart attack. In the UK, organs can be taken from people if they carry an organ donor card or on the online donor register. Alternatively, it is possible for a relative of someone who has died really suddenly, they can give their consent.